Is this thing on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Maybe I get right up close to it. Ooh, can you hear that? Is that volume? Is that volume acceptable? Hey everybody, I got new streaming software, even though I'm not streaming. And I'm gonna play around with it a little bit during this transmission, this broadcast of the program. And so today, I was doing a little watching, a little research. I was watching yet another sort of one of my contemporaries on this platform. Goes by the name of Vosh. When he was debating this, just some Nazi guy or whatever. And the subject of, whether or not something was objective came up a lot. And this is a topic that I think a lot of people just have never sort of investigated at all, because it's very much it's offered as a given to students in from elementary school on. And so I thought I'd just talk about the idea of objectivity versus subjectivity, and maybe if there's something else, which, spoiler alert, there is. So to start off, to just define, what objectivity typically means. Objectivity is it's like the what is thought to be studied in fields like physics or chemistry, where it's like, we're trying to subtract out the thinking people, the human frames of reference. We're trying to be as neutral as possible in that way with respect to what we would call the object of our study, so that we can understand in a way that doesn't rely on any perspective of an individual person or group of people, what's going on with that stuff, with that all that crud that they study. I've decided to clean up the show a little bit, so I'm going to be saying things like crud and heck, to try to see if we can get those numbers up, because I've made 2 YouTube accounts to subscribe to my own YouTube account to see if that would help. So anyway, that's the typical understanding that is sort of offered on the subject of objectivity, and it does fine. It's intuitive, right? Like, here I have a coffee mug, that this is an object. It exists separately from my interaction with it, from anyone's interaction with it, right? You could leave it in a room, walk away, lock the door, no one could ever go in that room again, and we could be reasonably sure that, at least for a very long period of time relative to us, there would still be a coffee mug there. So that's kind of what objective is thought to mean. And then there's the idea of subjective, and subjective is sort of the opposite of that. It's occupying all and only the sort of contours of an individual perspective, right? So an example of a subjective field of study is weird to try to offer an example, but there are things like, you could say opinions are subjective, right? Because it involves an individual person espousing what are purely idiosyncratic assessments of a given thing. So like the opinion, The Dark Knight Rises was a bad movie, happens to be an opinion that I hold, but it's not exactly objective, because at the end of the day, you can try to give as many descriptive claims about the movie to support that opinion as you can. Like, it doesn't offer a fulfilling character arc for our main protagonist, Bruce Wayne. The ending of the movie seems to be retconned in. It's not supported by the preceding events in the film. But at the end of the day, there's a leap that happens where you take all of those claims about the movie, and then you assess that, okay, those are bad things for a movie to have, for you to be able to say it about a movie. That's bad stuff. So that's sort of the typical distinction that people make between objective and subjective. And this sort of comes up a lot when you talk about like the concept of truth and all that sort of garbage nonsense stuff that people like to talk about and waste their time when they could be making Fortnite videos or whatever people do on this platform that makes them a bunch of money. And I wanted to sort of maybe offer another perspective on this, which is that there is, I think, a third position here that is neither properly understood as objective, but has many characteristics of objectivity, like mutually agreeable, not totally idiosyncratic in the sense that it's not just one person's, it's not just merely one person's opinion about things. But it's also not subjective in the sense that it doesn't rely necessarily on a single individual person's view of the world. However, it involves a leap beyond merely what we would typically call descriptive claims about the world, or statements of fact about states of affairs in space, and this position is understood as intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is the idea that while individual subjects have their own idiosyncrasies and their own irrational, which is not to say wrong, but not mediated by purely rational forces, opinions or thoughts about beliefs about the world, multiple subjects can come together and agree on a certain set of precepts. And then from there, even though those precepts are not themselves purely objective, they offer they offer a framework through which multiple unique subjects can converge on a mutually understood and agreed truth about the world. And an example of, I think a really frivolous example is like games, something like chess. There are I can't move a knight an unlimited number of spaces on the board. That's not legal. And it's true that it's not legal, but it's not true in an objective sense, because, even the claim to legality is a claim about, a norm. But it's a norm that we share in virtue of the context of playing chess as a game together. If I claim that I can move the knight an infinite number of spaces in a single move, then I'm not playing chess anymore. I have failed to meet the criteria of intersubjective truth. Then that's just a subjective opinion that I have about what I can do with a piece of wood or marble or whatever the piece happens to be made out of, and it fails to obtain the status of intersubjectivity. So while that's sort of a frivolous example, and obviously you can apply it to things like sports. There are legal and illegal moves in basketball and football and the other ones that people like. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people tend to think of this as sort of a trivial, and trivial in not the technical sense, but trivial in the sense that like it's not useful, it's not applicable generally, and I think that that's not true. And this kind of gets back to where I started this from, which is I was watching somebody with really bad assessments of the world. This Nazi guy debating Vosh, who has some opinions that I strongly agree with. And in the context of this conversation, I think I clearly come out on the side of Vosh. And this sort of equivocating that this Nazi was doing was, as to whether or not particular aspects of like aesthetics are objective. And his contention was, well, they are objective. But what he proceeded to describe was actually an intersubjective truth. It's not objective. It's not, you couldn't have if an alien race, I think this is a very common sort of thought experiment to determine whether or not something could be deemed objective, and it's intuitive in a lot of ways, but it's not perfect. That being said, if an alien species was to come down and assess what they found to be beautiful, it would be different from what we've found to be beautiful, and the traits that they list off would be different from the traits that we list off, most likely. It would at least be a very strange coincidence if that was not the case. And so this guy denies that this involves elements of subjectivity, and the reason he wants to do this is because he has very bad political opinions, and he can hide behind the guise of objectivity, which is thought to be serious academicians should strive for objectivity. And so if the system you're advocating for portends objectivity, then you must be a serious person. It's this weird sort of logic net, which leads to this tension point of needing to convince you that their opinions about aesthetics are objective, as opposed to, based on a bunch of very odd presuppositions that when you get right down to it don't make very much sense on their own and are not well grounded in any sort of historical realities. So this is kind of a tricky thing, a tricky idea that you should be on the lookout for when people talk about things as objective or subjective, and they present it as sort of an either or duality. I think it's appropriate to wonder and to ask yourself if that's really true, if it really happens to be objective or subjective and nothing else. I tend to think that most things that are claimed to be objective are intersubjective. The vast majority of claims to objectivity are mere claims to intersubjectivity that just have very few irrational presuppositions. So we tend to make the leap and say, well, because there's only a couple, then we'll call it objective, even though it doesn't really meet the standard that I've previously described of reducing to zero all subjective viewpoints. So I don't know if that was an interesting video, but we've got effects now. I can zoom in on stuff. I can move the camera around. Hold on. That's kind of lame. Come back. I can do that kind of thing. I can change the field of view. All this sort of kooky, awesome stuff I can do. Let's see, I turn off the auto white balance, then I can go all sepia toned. I can get all blue up in this biatch. So I'm gonna try out some of this stuff and see what happens. If I can come up with anything cooler than just sitting in front of the camera and sort of rambling for a little while. Yeah, so this is I guess in summation, Be critical when people tell you something is objective that seems like it's probably not, because the types of claims they make about what makes it objective tend to belie that it's merely intersubjective and intersubjectivity. An intersubjective truth can still be totally rejected out of hand because you reject their presuppositions. So that all being said, have a great day. Maybe don't... I don't know how to end these videos sometimes. You know what I mean? I feel like it might just be better if I just, like, if I just keep going, I could just keep talking about stuff, and then it's like the video's never gonna